In the vast expanse of the Galactic Coalition, where 1,000 species thrive under the banner of unity and progress, there exists an unspoken truth that chills the hearts of even the most advanced civilizations. Some beings are deemed too dangerous to live, too alien to accept, and too powerful to ignore. What happens when the galaxy's greatest powers abandon a child, not for his crimes, but for the circumstances of his birth? What becomes of a hybrid soul caught between two worlds, belonging to neither, wanted by none? Where a young species called humanity dwells, a race so new to the cosmic stage that they haven't yet learned what's impossible, so naive they haven't discovered what they should fear, and so stubborn they refuse to abandon those the universe has cast aside. This is the story of Zektar, whose reptilian heritage marks him as a monster and whose human blood makes him a pariah. This is the tale of how the galaxy's rejection became humanity's greatest gift, and how sometimes the most powerful bonds are forged not in the fires of similarity, but in the cold depths of shared isolation. Prepare yourself for a journey across star systems and through the hearts of beings who will discover that family isn't about the species you're born into. It's about the people who choose to stand with you when the entire galaxy turns its back. The emergency beacon pierced through the void of space like a desperate scream, its signal bouncing off asteroids and dead moons until it reached the outer sensors of New Harmony Station. Captain Sarah Chen was 3 hours into her morning coffee when the alert chimed through the bridge of the exploration vessel Wanderer. "Captain, we're picking up a distress signal from the Kethmori sector," reported Lieutenant Torres, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "It's strange. The signal pattern doesn't match any known Coalition emergency protocol." Sarah set down her mug, the bitter taste of synthetic coffee forgotten. The Kethmori sector was officially neutral space, a buffer zone between human territory and the Galactic Coalition's inner worlds. Nothing should be out there except automated mining drones and the occasional smuggler. Strange how? Sarah moved to the main display, watching as Torres pulled up the signal analysis. The frequency is definitely Coalition standard, but the modulation is off. It's like someone took a standard distress beacon and modified it, made it quieter, more hidden. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. Sarah had been exploring the Outer Rim for 5 years, ever since humanity had been granted preliminary membership in the Galactic Coalition. In that time, she'd seen plenty of strange things: ancient ruins, exotic matter formations, creatures that defied biological logic. But something about this signal made her skin crawl. Distance? 12 light hours. We could be there in 6 hours if we push the jump drive. Sarah studied the readout. Protocol dictated that she report any distress signals to Coalition authorities and let them handle it, but human ships were still restricted from most Coalition space, and by the time the bureaucracy sorted itself out, whoever was sending that signal might be dead. Plot a course, emergency speed. The Wanderer shuddered as its jump drive spun up, reality bending around the small exploration vessel as it leaped through folded space toward the source of the signal. Sarah spent the transit time reviewing Coalition first contact protocols and emergency procedures, though she had a feeling that whatever they found wouldn't fit neatly into any manual. 6 hours later, they dropped out of hyperspace to find a scene that would haunt Sarah's dreams for years to come. The wreckage of a Coalition medical transport hung in space like a broken bird, its hull split open and bleeding atmosphere into the void. But this wasn't the result of an accident or pirate attack. The cuts in the hull were too clean, too precise. Someone had deliberately crippled the ship, then left it to die slowly in the darkness between stars. "Life signs?" Sarah asked, though she already feared the answer. Torres ran a deep scan, her face grim. "Negative on the main ship. But, Captain, there's something else, a small craft about 2 kilometers off our port bow. It's tiny, barely more than a life pod, but it's intact and showing minimal life support. Any signs of life? Faint, but yes. 1 occupant. Biosigns are unusual. The rescue operation took 2 hours. The life pod was ancient by human standards, but cutting-edge Coalition technology designed to keep a single occupant alive for months if necessary." When they finally got it aboard and into the Wanderer's small medical bay, Sarah got her first look at what the galaxy had abandoned. The occupant was a child, no more than 12 years old by human standards, but calling him simply a child would have been like calling a hurricane. Simply whether his skin was a patchwork of smooth human flesh and scaled reptilian hide, the two textures meeting in seamless transitions that spoke of careful genetic engineering rather than random mutation. His eyes were the most striking feature, one brown and utterly human, the other a brilliant gold with a vertical pupil that tracked movement with predatory precision. Dr. Amanda Foster, the Wanderer's chief medical officer, ran her scanner over the unconscious form and shook her head. "I've never seen anything like this, Sarah. His genetic structure is impossible, human and something else, but not random mixing. This was deliberate, controlled. What's the other species? Best guess. Riskrath, the warrior caste from the Draco Nebula, but that doesn't make sense. The Skrath are isolationists. They barely tolerate the coalition, let alone interbreed with other species." Sarah stared down at the sleeping child. His breathing was steady but shallow, and she could see the rise and fall of a rib cage that seemed too large for his frame. "What about the medical transport? Any records?" Torres appeared in the doorway, a datapad in her hands. "I managed to recover some of the ship's logs before the core completely failed. It's disturbing, Captain." Sarah took the pad and scrolled through the translated text. What she read made her blood run cold. The transport had been carrying the child from Skarath's face to a Coalition research facility on Nexus Prime, but the official cargo manifest listed him as Specimen 7, Alpha, hybrid biological anomaly for termination and study. The child wasn't a patient or even a prisoner. He was cargo marked for destruction. "There's more," Torres continued. "I picked up some encrypted Coalition military chatter. Apparently, this kid's parents tried to hide him, keep him safe. The mother was human, some kind of diplomat or researcher who was working on Eskrath Prime. When the Eskrath found out about the child, they considered it an abomination. They were going to execute the whole family. What happened to the parents? Unknown. The log suggests the mother managed to get the child onto the medical transport, but there's no record of her after that. The Skrath probably," Torres trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah felt a familiar anger building in her chest, the same fury that had driven her to leave Earth and explore the stars in the first place. Humanity had spent most of its history learning to hate and fear what was different, and she'd hoped the galaxy would be better. Instead, she'd found the same prejudice and cruelty, just on a larger scale. "Captain, Doc..." Foster's voice was urgent. He's waking up. The child's eyes opened slowly, the human one first, then the reptilian one. For a moment he seemed disoriented, then his gaze fixed on Sarah's face. She saw intelligence there, and fear, but also something else, a kind of weary resignation that no child should ever possess. When he spoke, his voice was a strange harmony of human inflection and reptilian sibilance. "You are human. My name is Sarah. You're safe now." A bitter laugh escaped his throat, a sound that raised goosebumps along Sarah's arms. "Safe. There is no safe for one such as me. The humans will fear my Skrath blood, and the Skrath consider my human heritage a pollution. I am nothing. I belong nowhere." Sarah knelt beside the medical bed, bringing herself to eye level with the child. "What's your name?" "The Skrath called me Zektar, which means mistake in their tongue. The humans who held me called me Subject 7. I have never had a name given in kindness." Something broke inside Sarah's chest. She thought of her own childhood, of feeling like an outsider even among her own species, of the loneliness that had driven her to the stars, but this child had faced something infinitely worse. Rejection not just from society, but from existence itself. "Well, Zekthar," she said, and she saw him flinch slightly at the sound of his name spoken without disgust or clinical detachment. "I'm going to tell you something that might be hard to believe. You're wrong about humans. At least you're wrong about these humans." Zektar's golden eye narrowed with suspicion. "You will turn me over to the Coalition?" "It is the law. The coalition wanted you dead. We're not particularly fond of following laws that call for murdering children." For the first time, something like hope flickered in the child's expression. "You would keep me? Hide me?" Sarah looked around at her crew, Torres with her fierce loyalty, Dr. Foster with her gentle heart, and the dozen other souls who'd chosen to explore the unknown rather than stay safe on Earth. She saw her answer reflected in their faces. "Hide you? No, we're going to do something much better than that. We're going to give you a home." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah sent encrypted messages to the small network of human ships operating on the rim, spreading the word about their unusual passenger. The response was immediate and unanimous. If the coalition wanted the child dead, then humanity would keep him alive. Dr. Foster began the complex process of understanding Zektar's hybrid physiology, discovering that his body required both standard human nutrition and specific amino acids found only in SKS-RAF food sources. Torres worked on creating false identification records, weaving a digital identity that would let Zektar exist without attracting coalition attention. But the most important work was simply talking to him. Zektar had spent his entire short life as either a scientific curiosity or a political problem. No one had ever asked him what he wanted, what he dreamed about, or what made him laugh. Sarah and her crew changed that, treating him not as a hybrid anomaly, but as a child who'd been through hell and deserved something better. Slowly, carefully, they coaxed out his story. His mother had been Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist studying SHSRH reproduction cycles. His father was Thekmor, a mid-ranking warrior who'd been assigned as her escort and protection. What had started as professional respect had grown into something deeper, something that transcended species barriers. When Elena became pregnant, they'd known they were in danger. The Scrath viewed genetic purity as sacred, and the human-dominated coalition wasn't much better when it came to accepting radical hybridization. They'd tried to flee to neutral space, but the Scrath High Command had tracked them down. "My father fought them," Zektar told Sarah one evening as they sat in the observation deck, watching stars streak by outside the viewport. "He killed 7 warriors before they overwhelmed him. My mother, she held me as they dragged her away. I can still hear her voice telling me that someday I would find people who saw me as I truly am, not as what I am made of." Sarah felt tears threatening and fought them back. The child had been through enough without having to comfort her as well. "Your mother was wise, and she was right. The Scrath said she was weak for loving a creature like me. The coalition researchers said she was foolish for thinking a hybrid could survive. But you see something else. We see a kid who's been dealt a terrible hand by the universe, and we figure it's about time someone dealt you a better one." That night, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of human-alien relations forever. She sent a message to Admiral Jackson, the commanding officer of humanity's small but growing fleet, requesting permission to formally adopt Zektar as a ward of the human government. The response came back within hours. Request approved. Welcome him home. When Sarah told Zektar the news, the child did something she'd never seen before. He cried, not the bitter tears of despair she might have expected, but tears of relief and gratitude. For the first time in his life, someone wanted him not despite what he was, but because of who he was. "I do not understand," he said through his tears. "Why would your people risk conflict with the coalition for one such as me?" Sarah smiled and ruffled his hair, careful to avoid the more sensitive scaled areas. "Because that's what families do, Zektar. And whether you like it or not, you're family now." As the Wanderer set course for human space, carrying its precious cargo toward a new life, Sarah couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had looked at this child and seen only an abomination to be destroyed. Humanity, barely more than newcomers to the cosmic stage, had looked at the same child and seen potential. Perhaps that was humanity's greatest strength, not their technology or their military might, but their stubborn refusal to abandon hope, even when the entire universe said there was no reason to hope at all. The stars outside seemed brighter somehow, full of promise and possibility. And in the medical bay, a child who'd been forsaken by two worlds finally slept peacefully, knowing that he'd found a third world willing to call him son. 3 months after Zektar's rescue, the retribution came. The Coalition battlecruiser Divine Justice dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Terran system like an avenging angel, its hull gleaming with the polished perfection that spoke of unlimited resources and unquestioned authority. Admiral Kexthu, the Veltar commander of the vessel, stood on his bridge and gazed down at the small blue world that dared to defy the galactic order. "Scan the system," he ordered, his insectoid mandibles clicking with barely contained rage. "Find the human ship that harbors the abomination." The Wanderer had reached Earth 2 weeks earlier, and Zektar was now safely hidden on Luna Colony, living under the protection of the most heavily defended installation in human space. But Admiral Kexthu didn't know that. All he knew was that the humans had stolen Coalition property and needed to be taught a lesson about their place in the galactic hierarchy. On Earth, Admiral Patricia Jackson received the Coalition's ultimatum with the kind of calm that made seasoned veterans nervous. She'd been expecting this moment ever since Captain Chen's report had crossed her desk, and she'd spent the intervening months preparing for war. "They want the boy?" she asked her aide, reviewing the formal document that demanded Zektar's immediate surrender. "Yes, ma'am. They're calling it repatriation of stolen biological material. They're giving us 12 hours to comply." Jackson laughed, a sound with no humor in it. 12 hours. How generous of them. She activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Jackson. Condition red. Repeat, condition red." Across human space, the response was immediate. Humanity's fleet was small compared to the Coalition armadas, barely 200 ships of various classes. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in determination and ingenuity. More importantly, they'd spent the last few months preparing for exactly this scenario. Captain Chen, now serving as Zektar's official guardian, stood in the command center of Luna Colony and watched the tactical display with growing concern. The Divine Justice outmassed their entire fleet by a factor of 10, and its escort of 12 destroyers could probably handle half the human navy on their own. "We can't fight them conventionally," she told Colonel Martinez, the colony's military commander. "They'll cut through us like tissue paper." Martinez nodded grimly. "Admiral Jackson knows that. She's got something else in mind." On the surface of Earth, Zektar sat in Admiral Jackson's office, his hybrid features calm despite the chaos erupting around them. The past 3 months had been the happiest of his young life. The humans had welcomed him not as a curiosity or a problem to be solved, but as one of their own. He'd attended school with human children, learned to play their games, even started to think of their language as his native tongue. But now the galaxy had come calling, and he could see the fear in the eyes of the humans around him. Not fear of him, but fear for him. "You should give me to them," he said quietly, his reptilian eye fixed on the tactical display showing the Coalition fleet. "I am not worth starting a war." Admiral Jackson looked up from her planning screens, her weathered face showing no trace of the doubt that must have been eating at her. "Son, let me explain something about humans. We've got a lot of faults. We're stubborn, aggressive, and we don't know when to quit. But we also don't abandon family, and you're family now. The Coalition will destroy you for protecting me. Maybe, but that's our choice to make, and we've made it." The battle began 18 hours later, not with the grand fleet engagement that Kexthu expected, but with something far more subtle and infinitely more human. The first sign of trouble came when the Divine Justice's long-range sensors started malfunctioning. Not failing completely, that would have been too obvious, but providing readings that were just slightly off, just inconsistent enough to make targeting solutions unreliable. "Engineering reports minor electromagnetic interference," the Veltar sensor operator reported. "Source unknown, but minimal impact on ship operations." Admiral Kexthu dismissed the report. Human technology was primitive. Their electromagnetic signatures were probably just noise to advanced Coalition systems. He had more important concerns, like the fact that the human fleet seemed to be scattering rather than forming up for battle. "Cowards," he clicked dismissively. "Track the lead vessels. We'll destroy them one by one until they surrender the abomination." What Kextu didn't realize was that the scattered human ships were actually executing a carefully coordinated plan that had been months in the making. While he focused on hunting down individual vessels, teams of human engineers were busy with a project that would have seemed impossible to any civilized species. They were strip mining asteroids. The Terran system's asteroid belt was rich in heavy metals and rare minerals, but more importantly for Admiral Jackson's purposes, it was full of rocks that could be accelerated to significant fractions of light speed with the right application of human stubbornness and engineering know-how. Initiating Project Slingshot came the report from the converted mining vessel Prospector. First wave of packages away. Across the system, 12 mining ships began launching their cargo, chunks of nickel iron ore, each the size of a city block, each accelerated by hybrid fusion drives to nearly 10% of light speed. They would take hours to reach their targets, but when they arrived, they would hit with the force of nuclear weapons. Admiral Kextu realized something was wrong when his escort destroyers started disappearing. The first ship, the Cleansing Fire, simply vanished from his sensors between one sweep and the next. No explosion, no distress call, just there one moment and gone the next. The second ship lasted long enough to transmit a confused report about massive kinetic impact before its signal cut to static. "What are they shooting at us?" Kextu demanded, his calm finally cracking. "Unknown, Admiral. The projectiles are too small and fast for our defense systems to track reliably. But the mass readings, they're asteroids, sir. Somehow the humans are launching asteroids at relativistic speeds." For the first time in his career, Admiral Kextu felt genuine fear. The Coalition fought wars with energy weapons and guided missiles, elegant tools wielded by civilized beings. The humans were throwing rocks. But these weren't just any rocks. Each asteroid had been carefully shaped and fitted with guidance systems that allowed for minute course corrections during flight. The humans had turned space mining into a weapons system, and they were using it with devastating effectiveness. The Divine Justice itself took the next hit, a glancing blow that punched through her forward shields and carved a gouge 50 meters deep in her armored hull. Emergency klaxons wailed as atmosphere vented into space and entire sections of the ship lost power. "Damage report," Kextu shouted over the chaos. "Forward torpedo bays offline, main sensor array compromised, and we've lost primary power to decks 12 through 15. Admiral, we need to retreat." These humans are insane. But retreat was becoming increasingly difficult. The human ships that had seemed to be fleeing were now converging from multiple directions, not to engage in direct combat but to herd the Coalition vessels into specific trajectories. Every course change Kextu ordered seemed to take them directly into the path of another relativistic asteroid. On Luna Colony, Zektar watched the battle unfold with a mixture of awe and horror. He'd grown up thinking of humans as a weak primitive species barely worth notice by the great powers of the galaxy. But now he was seeing something that no Scarith warrior or Coalition admiral had ever witnessed: humanity at war. "They fight like my father's people," he whispered to Captain Chen, "but different. The Scrath are honorable warriors. This is practical," Chen finished. "We don't fight for honor, Zektar. We fight to win, and we fight to protect what's ours." The turning point came when Admiral Jackson herself entered the battle aboard her flagship, the heavy cruiser Indomitable. Rather than engaging the Coalition ships directly, she did something that no conventional military doctrine would have recommended. She opened a communication channel to the Divine Justice. "Admiral Kextu, this is Admiral Jackson of the Terran Defense Force. I'm offering you one chance to withdraw from this system with your remaining ships intact." Kextu's reply was filled with outrage and disbelief. "You dare threaten a Coalition fleet? You primitive mammals have no idea what forces you're provoking." "Actually, we have a pretty good idea," Jackson replied calmly. "We know the Coalition has larger fleets, better technology, and superior firepower. We also know that none of that matters if your ships are nothing but debris floating in space. You've lost half your escorts, your flagship is crippled, and we've got another 100 asteroids locked onto your remaining vessels. Still feeling lucky? The truth of her words was undeniable. In less than 6 hours of combat, the Coalition force had been reduced from a proud armada to a handful of damaged ships trying desperately to avoid being smashed to pieces by human-launched meteors. The Galactic Council will not tolerate this aggression, Kex2 warned, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Then maybe the Galactic Council should have thought of that before they tried to murder a child, Jackson snapped back. Here's how this is going to work, Admiral. You're going to limp back to Coalition space and deliver a message. Earth and her colonies are now under human protection. Anyone who wants to visit is welcome as long as they come in peace. Anyone who comes looking for trouble will leave as cosmic dust. Are we clear? The silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, Kex2's voice came through the comm, defeated and humiliated. Acknowledged, Admiral Jackson. Coalition forces are withdrawing. As the battered Coalition ships jumped to hyperspace, Admiral Jackson allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had just announced itself to the galaxy in terms that no one could misunderstand. But she also knew this was just the beginning. The Coalition wouldn't forget this humiliation, and they wouldn't give up on their claim to Zektar. But they would think twice before sending another fleet to human space. And in the meantime, humanity would continue doing what they did best, adapting, improvising, and protecting their own. On Luna Colony, Zektar watched the last Coalition ship disappear from the sensors and felt something he'd never experienced before. For the first time in his life, he was proud of the species that had claimed him. The humans hadn't just fought for him, they'd won. Why? He asked Captain Chen. Why risk so much for one person? Chen smiled and put her arm around his shoulders, careful as always of his scaled patches. 'Cause that's what makes us human, kid. We don't calculate the odds before we decide what's right. We just do what needs to be done and figure out the details later. As news of the battle spread through human space, Zektar began to understand that he wasn't just the child who'd been forsaken by the galaxy. He was also the first being to be adopted by humanity as a whole, the first test of whether the young species would stand by their principles when the cost became unbearable. They had passed that test, and in doing so, they had changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Coalition might have superior technology and greater numbers, but humanity had something more valuable: the absolute refusal to abandon those who trusted them. The war for Zektar's freedom was won, but the greater conflict was just beginning. And somewhere in the depths of space, other hybrid children, other outcasts and misfits began to look toward human space with something that hadn't existed in the galaxy for a very long time: hope. The message arrived on a frequency that shouldn't have existed, transmitted using technology that wasn't supposed to work, and delivered to a ship that officially didn't exist. Captain Maria Santos of the merchant vessel Free Trader decoded the signal while drifting in the shadow of a dead moon, and what she read made her blood run cold. Sanctuary Network, this is Whisper Station. We have 17 packages requiring immediate extraction. Coalition Purity Forces are closing in. Repeat, 17 souls need sanctuary. Please advise. Santos rubbed her tired eyes and checked the timestamp. The message was barely 6 hours old, transmitted from somewhere in the Rigel sector, deep in Coalition space where humans weren't supposed to be operating. But then again, the Sanctuary Network had never been particularly concerned with what they were supposed to be doing. It had been 8 months since the Battle of Terra, 8 months since humanity had bloodied the Coalition's nose and announced that they would protect their own. What the galaxy hadn't expected was how broadly humanity would define their own. The first refugee had arrived 3 months after Zektar's rescue, a Veltar engineer named Klix who'd been marked for genetic adjustment because his carapace patterns didn't match approved specifications. Someone in the Coalition bureaucracy had decided his unique coloring made him unsuitable for breeding, and he'd been scheduled for sterilization. Klix had made it to human space in a stolen maintenance pod, half dead from radiation poisoning and completely convinced he was going to be turned away. Instead, he'd found Dr. Foster waiting for him with a medical team and Captain Shen with a cup of coffee and a promise that no one would force him to change a single scale. Word had spread through the galaxy's underground networks there was a species of crazy primates who would take in anyone the Coalition wanted to throw away. It seemed impossible, but then again, so had their victory over Admiral Kexthu's fleet. Now Santos found herself running one of a dozen ships in humanity's unofficial refugee network, smuggling Coalition outcasts to safety while trying to avoid triggering another war. It was dangerous work, but someone had to do it, and humans had apparently decided that someone was them. Navigation, plot a course for Whisper Station, she ordered. And signal the network. Tell them we're going to need backup. The response came within hours. 3 other ships would converge on the extraction point. The Starling under Captain Webb, the armed merchant Defiance, commanded by Chen's former Lieutenant Torres, and most surprisingly the heavy cruiser Righteous Fury, carrying Admiral Jackson herself. Admiral on deck for a refugee run? Santos's first officer, a grizzled ex-coalition pilot named Garrett, shook his head. This must be bigger than we thought. Santos reviewed the mission briefing and felt her stomach drop. Whisper Station wasn't just reporting random refugees. They had discovered a Coalition genetic purity facility on Kepler 442b, a prison where hybrids, mutations, and genetically deviant individuals were held for experimentation and eventual elimination. The 17 packages weren't just refugees. They were children. Jesus Christ, Garrett whispered when he saw the files. Look at this. Half human, half Altarian, Scrath-Veltar hybrid. 3 kids who are part human, part something the Coalition's xenobiologists haven't even classified yet. What kind of monsters? The kind we're going to stop, Santos interrupted. Signal the fleet. Emergency protocols. We go in hard and we go in fast. The assault on the Kepler facility was planned with the same ruthless efficiency that had characterized the Battle of Terra. While Coalition security focused on the impossible task of tracking human stealth ships through an asteroid field, Admiral Jackson's forces struck from an unexpected direction. The facility itself was a testament to Coalition arrogance, a gleaming spire rising from the surface of a tidally locked world, protected by shields and automated defenses but staffed by scientists who'd never expected to face military action. The first they knew of the attack was when human drop pods started crashing through their windows. Lieutenant Sarah Kim led the extraction team through the facility's sterile corridors, following intelligence provided by a Veltar janitor who'd been secretly documenting the horrors for months. What they found in the lower levels made even hardened Marines sick to their stomachs. The children were kept in cells designed for lab animals, fed through tubes and monitored by automated systems that treated them as experimental subjects rather than sentient beings. Some had been surgically altered, their natural hybrid features corrected according to Coalition standards. Others showed signs of genetic manipulation, their DNA restructured in ways that left them in constant pain. "My God," Kim whispered as she found the first group of prisoners. "What did they do to you?" The child who answered was perhaps 10 years old, with features that seemed to shift between human and something crystalline. When she spoke, her voice resonated with harmonic overtones that no human throat could produce. "They were making us pure," she said, the word carrying a weight of suffering that no child should understand, taking away the parts that didn't belong. They said we would thank them when it was finished. Kim's hand shook as she cut the restraints. "Not anymore, sweetheart. Not anymore." The extraction took 47 minutes from start to finish. By the time Coalition reinforcements arrived, the human ships were already jumping to hyperspace, carrying their precious cargo toward the one place in the galaxy where being different was considered a strength rather than a flaw. The journey back to human space was heartbreaking in ways that veteran space marines were unprepared for. Many of the children had never seen the stars, having spent their entire lives in windowless cells. Others flinched away from kindness, unable to believe that the soft-spoken humans wouldn't hurt them. But slowly, carefully, the rescue teams began the work of healing. Dr. Foster, now serving as head of Human Refugee Medical Services, worked around the clock to undo the damage that Coalition genetic purity protocols had inflicted. Not all of it could be reversed, but she was determined to give these children the best life possible. Zekdar, now 15 and serving as an unofficial ambassador to hybrid refugees, spent hours with the newcomers, helping them understand that their differences weren't flaws to be corrected, but gifts to be celebrated. They told me I was an abomination, he explained to a girl whose Altarian heritage gave her the ability to perceive electromagnetic fields. They said my mixed blood made me weak, unsuitable. But the humans, they see strength where others see wrongness. Why? She asked, her large eyes filled with wonder and confusion. Why do they care about us? Zekdar smiled, remembering asking the same question months earlier. Because that's who they are. They don't see species or genetic purity or any of the things the Coalition obsesses over. They just see people who need help. The rescue at Kepler 442b wasn't an isolated incident. Over the following months, the Sanctuary Network grew into a full-scale underground railroad, moving outcasts and refugees from across Coalition space to human territories. Each ship carried stories of beings who'd been rejected, experimented on, or marked for elimination because they didn't fit the galaxy's narrow definitions of acceptable existence. There was Thax, a Rigelian whose natural bioluminescence had been deemed aesthetically displeasing by Coalition beauty standards. The authorities had planned to surgically remove his light-producing organs, but he'd escaped and made his way to human space, where children gathered around him at night to watch him paint patterns of light across his skin. There was Dr. Yilsith, a Centaurian researcher who'd been exiled for refusing to develop bioweapons designed to target specific genetic markers. She now worked alongside human scientists, developing new medical technologies that treated all species equally rather than favoring genetic purity. And there were dozens of hybrids, children whose very existence challenged the Coalition's rigid species classifications. Human Scrath, Veltar Altaiarian, and combinations so complex that xenobiologists couldn't identify all the component species. The Coalition saw them as abominations to be eliminated. Humanity saw them as the future, but the network's activities didn't go unnoticed. Coalition intelligence agencies began tracking the disappearances, mapping the patterns, and slowly closing in on the truth. The humans weren't just harboring a single hybrid child, they were systematically dismantling the galaxy's genetic purity programs. The response came in the form of Ambassador Veltara of the Rigelian Union, one of the Coalition's founding members. She arrived at Earth aboard a diplomatic courier, requesting an audience with human leadership to discuss matters of mutual concern. Admiral Jackson met with her in the same office where she planned humanity's defense against Admiral Kexthu's fleet, but this time the conversation was far more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. Admiral, Veltara began, her crystalline features catching the light as she spoke, the Coalition is aware of your activities in our space. We appreciate that humanity has chosen to involve itself in galactic affairs, but there are protocols, procedures. Cut the diplomatic double talk, Jackson interrupted. You're here because we're interfering with your genocide program. Velthara's form flickered, a sign of agitation in her species. The Coalition's genetic purity initiatives are based on careful scientific analysis. We are preventing the dilution of species-specific traits that have evolved over millions of years. You're murdering children because they don't fit your narrow definition of normal. We are preserving the natural order. The natural order? Jackson laughed bitterly. Ambassador, let me explain something about the natural order. Evolution doesn't give a damn about your purity standards. It's messy, chaotic, and unpredictable, and sometimes it produces something better than what came before. She gestured toward the observation window where Earth hung in space like a blue jewel. My species was almost extinct 50,000 years ago. We survived because we were adaptable, because we could crossbreed with closely related species, because we refused to accept that purity was more important than survival. And now here we are taking in the refugees you create with your obsession with genetic perfection. Velthara stood, her form rigid with controlled anger. You cannot continue this interference. The Coalition will not tolerate The Coalition will learn to live with it, Jackson cut her off, because the alternative is finding out whether we can turn your homeworld into an asteroid belt. And believe me, Ambassador, after what we've seen in your purity facilities, some of my people are eager to find out. The threat hung in the air between them, backed by the very real knowledge that humanity had already proven capable of defeating Coalition forces through sheer bloody-minded determination. Velthara left Earth with a warning that this matter was far from over, but Jackson had delivered a message of her own. Humanity would not be intimidated into abandoning their principles, no matter what the cost. As word of the confrontation spread through human space, volunteers for the Sanctuary Network multiplied. Merchant captains offered their ships, scientists volunteered to help heal refugee children, and ordinary citizens opened their homes to beings who had nowhere else to go. Zektar, now recognized as humanity's first official hybrid citizen, found himself at the center of something larger than he'd ever imagined. The boy who'd been forsaken by two species had become the symbol of a third species' determination to build a better galaxy. "They still call me an abomination," he told Admiral Jackson during one of their regular conversations. "Coalition propaganda broadcasts describe me as a genetic mistake that threatens the natural order." Jackson smiled grimly. "Let them talk. While they're busy arguing about genetic purity, we'll be busy proving that diversity is strength. And when the dust settles, we'll see whose approach builds a better future." Outside the window, another ship docked at Luna Station, another group of refugees seeking sanctuary among the humans who decided that being different wasn't a crime. The galaxy might not be ready to accept that lesson, but humanity was teaching it anyway, one rescued child at a time. The war began officially on a Tuesday with a declaration broadcast simultaneously across 17 Coalition worlds and transmitted to every human outpost in the galaxy. Grand Admiral Zexkov of the Altarian fleet stood before the assembled Galactic Council and announced that humanity had become a clear and present danger to galactic stability and would be dealt with accordingly. Unofficially, the war had been building for 2 years, ever since the first refugee ship had arrived in human space. Every hybrid child rescued, every genetically deviant individual given sanctuary, every successful sanctuary network operation had pushed the Coalition closer to a breaking point. The humans had stopped being merely annoying and had become an existential threat to everything the Coalition represented. Zektar, now 18 and serving as a senior advisor to the Human Defense Council, watched the declaration from Admiral Jackson's command center on Luna Station. His hybrid features had settled into a striking combination of human intelligence and S-craft power, and his voice carried the authority of someone who'd become the living symbol of humanity's ideals. "They're scared," he observed, studying Zexkoth's carefully worded speech. "This isn't about genetic purity anymore. It's about survival. They know that if humanity's approach spreads, their entire system collapses." Admiral Jackson nodded grimly. Intelligence reports had been flooding in for months about Coalition worlds experiencing genetic deviance incidents, spontaneous uprisings by hybrids and outcasts who'd been inspired by humanity's example. The Coalition's response had been brutal and swift, but each crackdown only created more refugees seeking the protection of human space. "What are we looking at in terms of numbers?" Jackson asked her intelligence chief, Colonel Martinez. "Combined Coalition forces total approximately 47,000 ships, including 16 dreadnoughts and over 200 battle cruisers. They're massing at Nexus Prime and the Rigel staging areas. Against that we have," Martinez paused, checking his figures, "roughly 800 combat vessels, most of them converted merchant ships." The silence in the command center was deafening. Even with their technological innovations and unconventional tactics, humanity was facing odds of nearly 60 to 1. "Recommendations?" Jackson asked. "Surrender," Martinez said bluntly. "Negotiate the best terms we can for our refugee populations and hope the Coalition shows mercy." "No." The voice came from an unexpected source. Thax, the bioluminescent Regelian who'd been one of the first refugees. Now serving as humanity's chief xenobiological advisor, his skin patterns flickered with determination. You don't understand what you've created here. The Coalition isn't just fighting humans, they're fighting the idea that beings like me have a right to exist. Dr. Yulseth, the exiled Centaurian scientist, stepped forward from the group of refugee advisors. Thax is correct. My people have a saying, the tree that stands alone may fall, but the forest endures. You have planted a forest, Admiral. Even if Earth falls, the seeds have already spread. Jackson looked around the room at the collection of humans and refugees, the mixed group of species that would have been impossible under Coalition law. They were right. This was bigger than one war or one species. This was about the future of the galaxy itself. Then we don't fight to win, she decided. We fight to survive long enough for the forest to grow, and we make sure the Coalition pays such a price for their victory that no one will ever want to repeat it. The first phase of the war went exactly as Coalition strategists had predicted. Their fleet swept through human space like an unstoppable tide, crushing resistance and systematically destroying military installations. The humans' unconventional tactics slowed the advance, but couldn't stop it. Asteroid bombardments and stealth attacks took a toll on Coalition forces, but for every Coalition ship destroyed, humanity lost 10. But something strange began happening as the Coalition fleets advanced toward Earth. They encountered resistance from an unexpected source, their own member species. The first defection occurred at the Battle of Wolf 359 when the Veltar captain of the heavy cruiser Righteous Purpose suddenly turned his weapons on his Coalition escorts. His message to the human defenders was brief and to the point. I stand with those who stand for her. Within hours, similar defections occurred across the front. Scrath warriors who'd grown tired of watching hybrid children murdered in the name of purity, Rigelian scientists who'd been silenced for questioning genetic orthodoxy, Centaurian philosophers who believed in the value of diversity. One by one, ships began changing sides. The Coalition command structure was unprepared for this development. Their entire military doctrine was based on species loyalty and genetic purity. The idea that their own people would betray them for the sake of outcasts and hybrids was literally inconceivable. Grand Admiral Zexkoth addressed his remaining fleet commanders with barely controlled fury. These traitors have been contaminated by human ideology. They are no longer fit for command. Execute any captain who shows signs of wavering loyalty. But the executions only accelerated the defections. By the time the Coalition fleet reached the inner solar system, nearly a quarter of their forces had switched sides or simply disappeared into the void. The final battle took place not in the space around Earth, but on the surface of Luna Colony itself. Coalition assault forces landed expecting to face desperate human defenders and their refugee allies. Instead, they found themselves in a maze of tunnels and chambers that had been designed by hybrid minds that thought in 3 dimensions, defended by beings whose genetic diversity gave them abilities no purebred species could match. Zektar led one of the defense teams, his Scrath heritage allowing him to track enemy movements through vibrations while his human intelligence developed tactical responses in real time. Alongside him fought beings who shouldn't have existed according to Coalition doctrine. Hybrids whose mixed genetics gave them advantages their pure opponents couldn't counter. The battle raged for 6 days and nights with Coalition forces advancing meter by bloody meter through the colony's defenses. But for every defensive position they overran, they faced something new and unexpected. Altairian human hybrids who could see in spectrums that made stealth technology useless. Scratch Veltar combinations whose natural armor was resistant to energy weapons. Children whose genetic makeup was so complex that Coalition forces couldn't even classify them, let alone predict their abilities. On the 7th day, Grand Admiral Zexkoth himself led the final assault on the colony's command center. He found Admiral Jackson waiting for him in her office, surrounded by the refugees she'd sworn to protect. "It's over, Admiral," Zexkoth declared, his crystalline features reflecting the harsh lighting of the battle-damaged chamber. "Your fleet is destroyed, your colonies are captured, and your homeworld is blockaded. Surrender now, and I promise that your executions will be swift." Jackson looked up at him with tired eyes. You still don't get it, do you? Get what? You have lost everything. Have I? Jackson activated the wall display, showing a tactical overview of the galaxy. Red indicators showed coalition forces, but scattered among them were thousands of green dots, ships, colonies, and stations that had declared independence from coalition rule.
Take a look, Admiral. While you've been focused on destroying us, your empire has been falling apart.
Zexkoth stared at the display in growing horror. What he was seeing was impossible. Coalition worlds were declaring independence, member species were withdrawing from the alliance, and entire sectors were establishing autonomous governments based on human principles of genetic acceptance. This is impossible. You are one primitive species with a handful of ships. We're the proof of concept, Jackson interrupted. We prove that it's possible to build a society based on accepting differences instead of eliminating them. And now that the galaxy has seen it work, they want it for themselves. Behind Zexkoth, his own troops were beginning to lower their weapons. Many of them had hybrid features that would have marked them for elimination in earlier generations, the results of genetic mixing that had been quietly tolerated as long as it remained hidden. But humanity had made hiding unnecessary. You have contaminated the natural order, Zexkoth said. But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. We've shown the galaxy what the natural order actually is, Jackson replied. Evolution, adaptation, change. You tried to freeze the galaxy in place to preserve some imaginary ideal of purity that never really existed. We just reminded everyone that diversity is how life actually works. The moment of truth came when Zekdar stepped into the room, his hybrid features marking him as everything the Coalition had tried to eliminate. Behind him came the other refugee children, dozens of beings whose very existence challenged everything Zexkoth believed. Grand Admiral, Zekdar said, his voice carrying the harmonics of multiple species. My name is Zekdar Vasquez Chen Jackson. I am the son of a human diplomat and a Scrath warrior. I am a citizen of Earth and Luna Colony, and I am the future you're trying to destroy. Zexkoth looked at the hybrid youth, seeing in his confident stance and clear gaze everything that the Coalition had declared impossible. Here was a being who should have been weak, confused, genetically unstable. Instead, he radiated strength and purpose. You are an abomination, Zexkoth whispered, but the words came out like a question. No, Zekdar replied gently. I'm something new, something better, something that couldn't exist in your galaxy but thrives in ours. The war officially ended 3 hours later, when Grand Admiral Zexkoth signed the Terra Accords in the same room where Admiral Jackson had once planned humanity's defense. The terms were simple. The Coalition would recognize the independence of all worlds that chose to withdraw, human space would be acknowledged as sovereign territory, and most importantly, the genetic purity laws would be abolished throughout Coalition space. But the real victory wasn't written in any treaty. It was visible in the faces of the beings who gathered to watch the signing, humans and aliens, purebreds and hybrids, all standing together as equals for the first time in galactic history. As news of the peace spread across human space, spontaneous celebrations broke out on every world and station. But for Zekdar, the most meaningful moment came when Admiral Jackson found him on Luna Colony's observation deck, looking out at the stars. Regrets? She asked, settling beside him on the bench. About the war? No. About the lives lost? Always? He was quiet for a moment. But I keep thinking about something my mother told me before she died. She said that someday I would find people who saw me as I truly am. She was right, but even she couldn't have imagined this. Jackson smiled. What's that? She thought I'd find acceptance. Instead, I found a family that was willing to fight the entire galaxy for the right to love me exactly as I am. Outside the viewport, ships from dozens of species moved through space together. Former enemies now working side by side to build something the galaxy had never seen before. A civilization based not on purity or perfection, but on the radical idea that difference was strength. The boy who'd been forsaken by the galaxy had become the catalyst for its transformation. And in the years to come, as new hybrid children were born free from the fear of persecution, they would grow up knowing that their diversity wasn't a flaw to be hidden, but a gift to be celebrated. The galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. Humanity might be young and primitive, but they possess something more powerful than advanced technology or superior firepower. They had the stubborn refusal to abandon hope even when the universe itself seemed determined to crush it, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. 15 years after the signing of the Terra Accords, Ambassador Zektar Vasquez Chain Jackson stood before the Galactic Assembly and prepared to deliver the most important speech of his life. The massive chamber on New Geneva Station buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages, and the beings filling the seats represented every corner of known space. But this wasn't the same Galactic Assembly that had once debated his right to exist. The old coalition structure had collapsed in the aftermath of the war, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly representative democracy where genetic heritage mattered less than the quality of one's ideas. "Honored delegates," Zektar began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. 15 years ago, I was a child marked for death by the very organization that once governed this galaxy. Today, I stand before you as your elected Secretary General, representing not just humanity or hybrids, but everyone who believes in the fundamental dignity of life in all its forms. The applause was thunderous, coming from beings whose very presence in the chamber would have been impossible under the old regime. Hybrid representatives sat beside pure-blooded delegates, their diverse appearances a testament to how much the galaxy had changed. In the VIP gallery, Admiral Jackson, now retired and serving as Earth's senior diplomat, watched with pride as the child she'd helped rescue delivered his inaugural address. Beside her sat Dr. Foster, whose medical expertise had become the foundation for the new galaxy's approach to genetic diversity, and Captain Chen, whose courage had started the chain of events that led to this moment. "Magnificent, isn't he?" "Dr." Foster whispered. "He always was," Jackson replied. "We just gave him the chance to show it." Zektar continued his speech, outlining his vision for the next phase of galactic civilization. The Terra Accords had been just the beginning, a necessary step toward dismantling the structures of genetic oppression that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. But the real work lay in building something better. The old coalition promised order through uniformity, he said, his hybrid features catching the light as he spoke. They believed that peace could only exist when differences were eliminated or suppressed. The past 15 years have proven them wrong. We have seen that true stability comes not from sameness, but from acceptance, not from purity, but from the strength that emerges when diverse minds work together toward common goals. The statistics bore out his words. Since the establishment of the new Galactic Assembly, technological progress had accelerated beyond anything the Coalition had achieved. Hybrid scientists brought unique perspectives that led to breakthrough discoveries. Cross-species collaboration produced innovations that no single species could have developed alone. The Altarian-human hybrid Dr. Sarah Kim had revolutionized faster-than-light communication by combining human intuition with Altarian crystalline resonance technology. A Skrath-Veltar engineer named Thekvor had designed ships that could withstand the gravitational forces near black holes, opening up previously inaccessible regions of space for exploration. But perhaps most importantly, the new galaxy was producing a generation of children who had never known a time when their genetic heritage could be used to determine their worth. "I want to introduce you to someone," Zektar said, gesturing toward the gallery. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone who had never been taught to be ashamed of what she was. Her name was Luna Martinez Thax Yilseth, and her genetic heritage was so complex that coalition scientists would have declared her an impossibility. Human, Rigelian, and Centaurian DNA combined in her cells, giving her abilities that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Her skin could shift between human flesh and bioluminescent patterns, her mind could process quantum calculations instinctively, and her empathic abilities allowed her to communicate across species barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. Under the old coalition, she would have been terminated before birth. In the new galaxy, she was simply a child with extraordinary gifts and the freedom to use them. Luna represents something that our predecessors considered impossible, Zektar explained as the girl stood beside him completely at ease before the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. She is the future they tried to prevent, living proof that evolution doesn't respect the boundaries we try to impose on it. Luna stepped forward to the podium, her voice clear and strong despite her youth. But I know what I really am. I'm a bridge between worlds, a connection between species, a living reminder that differences aren't flaws to be corrected, they're gifts to be shared. The response from the assembly was emotional, with many delegates openly weeping as they witnessed this child speaking words that would have been heretical just a generation earlier. But the true power of the moment lay not in what Luna said, but in how naturally she said it. For her, genetic diversity wasn't a political position or a scientific theory, it was simply the way the universe worked. After the ceremony, Zektar found himself in his new office, looking out at the starfield visible through the massive viewport. The responsibilities of his new position weighed heavily on him, but he felt ready for the challenge. A soft chime announced a visitor, and he turned to find an unexpected guest, Grand Admiral Zekskoth, the former coalition commander who had once tried to destroy humanity and everything it represented. Mr. Secretary General, Zekskoth said formally, his crystalline features showing the wear of 15 years of exile and reflection. I hope you can spare a few minutes for an old enemy. Zektar gestured toward the seating area, curious about what had brought his former nemesis to New Geneva Station. I always have time for honest conversation, Admiral. What's on your mind? Zekskoth was quiet for a long moment, his form flickering with the subtle color changes that indicated deep emotion in his species. I've spent the past 15 years watching what you've built here, studying your progress, analyzing your methods, trying to understand how everything I believed could have been so wrong. And what conclusions have you reached? That you were never our enemy. We were our own enemy, prisoners of our own fear and ignorance. Zekskoth's voice carried a weight of regret that spanned decades. I convinced myself that I was protecting galactic civilization, preserving the natural order. But what I was really doing was preventing evolution itself. Zektar leaned forward, genuinely interested in this conversation with the being who had once represented everything he'd been taught to fear. What changed your mind, my granddaughter? Zekskoth said simply. She was born 5 years ago on one of the outer colonies. Her mother had been exposed to radiation during a mining accident, and the genetic damage should have killed the child before birth. Instead, she survived, but with mutations that would have marked her for termination under the old laws. The former admiral's form brightened with what Zektar recognized as joy, a rare emotion for the typically stoic Altarian species. She can metabolize hard radiation directly, convert it into usable energy for her body. She can survive in environments that would kill any normal Altarian. Under the Coalition, she would have been seen as a monster. Under your system, she's being recruited by the Deep Space Exploration Corps. She sounds remarkable. She is. And she exists because you taught the galaxy that remarkable doesn't mean wrong. Zekskoth stood, his posture formal but respectful. I came here to ask for something that I have no right to request. What's that? Forgiveness. Not for myself. I know the magnitude of my crimes, but for my people. Many Altarians still struggle with the changes you've brought. They're not evil, just afraid. They need time to understand that diversity is strength, not weakness. Zektar was quiet for several minutes, thinking about forgiveness and growth and the long path from hatred to understanding. Finally, he spoke. Admiral, 15 years ago you stood in Admiral Jackson's office and called me an abomination. You were prepared to execute me and everyone who had protected me, all in the name of preserving genetic purity. Zekskoth flinched but didn't look away. Today you're here asking me to help your people adapt to a galaxy where your granddaughter can be valued for who she is rather than feared for what she represents. That's not just character growth. That's a fundamental transformation of everything you once believed. Zektar stood and extended his hand in the human gesture of reconciliation. The galaxy has room for everyone who's willing to learn and grow. That includes former enemies who become future allies. Zexkoth stared at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out and grasped it firmly. The contact between human SOS Krath hybrid and pure-blooded Altarian would have been illegal under Coalition law. Now it represented hope for a future neither species could have imagined alone. As news of Zektar's appointment and Luna's speech spread across the galaxy, spontaneous celebrations erupted on thousands of worlds. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from the places where it was least expected. The former Coalition core worlds where genetic purity had once been considered sacred. On Rigel Prime, a group of genetically deviant children held their first public gathering, their bioluminescent patterns spelling out thank you in a dozen languages. On Scrath Homeworld, young warriors who had been hidden because their scale patterns didn't meet traditional standards stepped into the sunlight for the first time. And in the depths of space, on ships and stations and colonies scattered across the galaxy, children of mixed heritage looked up at the stars and knew that their differences made them not outcasts, but pioneers. Doc Foster, now in her 70s but still active in refugee medical services, stood in the observation lounge of Luna Colony and watched the ships coming and going, vessels carrying beings from every corner of known space, all working together to build something unprecedented. "You know," she said to Admiral Jackson, who had joined her for their weekly coffee, "when we first found that child in the wreckage of a Coalition transport, I never imagined it would lead to this." Jackson smiled, thinking about the scared hybrid boy who would become the leader of galactic civilization. "Sarah used to say we were just doing what needed to be done. But I think we were doing something more important than that." "What's that?" "We were proving that the future doesn't have to be limited by the past, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to accept that something is impossible just because it's never been done before." Outside the viewport, a new ship docked at the station. Another group of refugees, perhaps, or maybe just travelers exploring a galaxy where they were free to be themselves. Either way, they would find welcome here, among the humans who had decided that family was bigger than species, stronger than genetics, and more important than any law or tradition that said otherwise. The boy who had been forsaken by the galaxy had grown up to transform it. The species that had been dismissed as primitive had taught the cosmos a lesson about the true meaning of civilization. And in the vast expanse of space, millions of beings who had once lived in fear of their differences now celebrated them as gifts. The galaxy had learned that evolution wasn't about perfection, it was about possibility. And in a universe full of infinite possibilities, there was room for everyone. Zektar's inauguration marked not just the beginning of his term as Secretary General, but the dawn of a new chapter in galactic history. A chapter written not by those who sought to control evolution, but by those who had the courage to let it flourish. A chapter where the measure of a being wasn't the purity of their genetics, but the content of their character. And as the stars wheeled overhead, carrying their cargo of dreams and possibilities toward an uncertain but hopeful future, one truth echoed across the cosmos. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or military might or political power. Sometimes it's simply the stubborn refusal to abandon those who have nowhere else to go. The galaxy had tried to forsake a half-human, half-reptile hybrid child. Instead, they had created the catalyst for their own transformation, and in the end, that made all the difference.